Hello fellow YouTube friends, followers, foes and Flabbergastas, my name is Mason and it's time for another Guild Wars 2 Easy and Flexible build guide. The goal of this guide is to enable you as much flexibility and low switching costs between PvE game modes on a particular class and elite specialization. This means that whenever possible, I will use only one set of gear with slight alterations. To accomplish that goal, I suggest gear that allows for high damage and the necessary defense/support is accommodated for through traits, food and skill changes only. Today's class of choice is the Ranger and the elite spec is the Untamed. I'm going to discuss 3 different build variants, a power DPS variant, an open world build and an Alacrity DPS variant. Before we dive into the build, let's talk some pros and cons. This build has reliable DPS with 34k and has a very easy rotation. It also has great CC capabilities via Unleashed Pet. In the way we play it in open world, it's almost unkillable due to high cooldown reductions. If you decide to use those cooldown reductions, the build can become quite spammy though. And I guess you could say that the downside is that it requires flanking due to using the skirmishing specialization. Have you ever wanted to play something that involves smashing stuff with a shiny giant hammer? You've come to the right place because today is Power Untamed Day. I wanted to make this video for a long time because of the sheer power Untamed has in open world, pun intended, and finally they made it good enough in group content to use it without making the situation in raids awkward for everyone or breaking your fingers. Before we dive into the details of the skills and all, let's take a quick look at how Untamed works. Untamed feels similar to the core Ranger in that you have your 2 pets that you can swap between, but in Untamed you can either be unleashed yourself to empower your damage, or unleash your pet empowering your defense and crowd control. There is only a 1-second cooldown on unleashing, so you can swap back and forth very frequently. In group content, we'll stay unleashed ourselves for most of the time to dish out high damage. This mechanic generally makes Untamed very flexible. If you feel like you don't need the CC or defense, you can just hammer away unleashed and enjoy higher damage, especially with allies around you. The defensive option of having the pet unleashed paired with the trait Fervent Force makes Untamed one of the most insanely powerful specs in open world. You won't be dishing out insane amounts of damage on power Untamed if you keep your pet unleashed, but you just will not die because your heal skill and all other skills recharge much quicker than usual. When you have your pet unleashed, it also gains access to a new set of skills. These are the same for all pets, so this is different from Soul Beast. They do not have a cast time, so you can spam them at any time while doing other things. They are free damage, so it's worth quickly swapping over to unleash your pet, just to press these 3 skills and then swap back. Swapping back to unleash yourself will trigger unleashed ambushes. These are another mechanic unique to Untamed and have a usage window of 4 seconds. Each weapon has a different ambush. They are good skill options but not really overpowered, so it's not a big deal if you cancel them. The first pet skill is Venomous Outburst. This does a bit of strike damage and applies poison, blindness and vulnerability. It's very nice to have, it also teleports your pet to the target, so it's a good opener. Rending Vines, pet skill number 2, removes boons from enemies, so you can save this for situations in which you might need that, and it also applies slow to disabled or defiant enemies. The third one is Enveloping Haze. This does the most strike damage from the 3, it creates a poison combo field and lasts 5 seconds, it also applies chilled. Generally, as you can see, you apply a lot of soft CC conditions with these skills. Don't underestimate how powerful that is in open world. The weapon that comes with Untamed is the Hammer, and the main mechanic when using Hammer is that you will have different skill variants for the 5 hammer skills depending on who is unleashed. First off, the Hammer auto attack chain is very strong, so try to fit in many auto chains and don't cancel them, because the damage increases from the first to the last hit. The Unleashed Hammer Ambush Relentless Whirl is a spin attack that also siphons health from enemies and thus heals you. It further applies stability to you, so you can actually time this to avoid incoming CC. The interaction with other skills is a bit weird sometimes. Sometimes it starts immediately after unleashing yourself, sometimes it does not. The main idea behind hammer rotations on Untamed is that Hammer 2 and 4 do by far the most damage, so they are prioritized while you are unleashed. Hammer 2 and 4 will also deal higher damage against enemies that are disabled or defiant, which basically guarantees the bonus damage in group content, because there are a lot of boss type enemies. Hammer 4 also scales with the amount of conditions on the enemy, so keep that in mind. While the pet is unleashed, Hammer 3 and 5 apply hard CCs and trigger the trait Fervent Force, which reduces all cooldowns of your active skills by 4 seconds. That is why they are commonly used with your pet unleashed. We're only using that trait in open world though, so keep that in mind as well. The 2 skill type mechanic on Untamed allows you to save Hammer 3 and 5 for times when you need CC at a very small damage loss. In that case, quickly swap over to unleash your pet and use them. Okay, moving on to utility options. Your heal skill should always be We Heal as One. It heals yourself and your pet, has a short cooldown and most importantly copies boons from your pet to you and vice versa. Paired with other boon related traits, this allows you to maintain protection on yourself and your pet in open world, which makes you even more survivable. A skill that I also always have on is Exploding Spores. It's the only utility skill that comes with Untamed that does damage and is able to apply hard CC. The drawback is that you need to hit with all spores to apply the knockdown, which can be tricky in situations where you and enemies are moving. It's easier to do on bosses with larger hitboxes, obviously. The next slot is the designated flag spot. For damage purposes, you should always put Frost Trap here. In open world, I have a few different candidates for you. First is the Storm Spirit. This grants you Fury at frequent intervals, and using its teleport skill applies a daze around it, again triggering Fervent Force. Fury is the most essential boon for you, because with the specializations that we chose, it grants you 40% critical chance. The second option for higher mobility is Unnatural Traversal. This teleports you to the enemy and applies vulnerability around you. If you hit an enemy with it, it will further reduce its own cooldown by 50%. Finally, if you feel like you need it, you can use Protect Me for even higher protection uptime and Frequent Barrier, paired with a Stun Break to have an emergency button. I always keep Signet of the Wild for the passive Ferocity bonus. If you need additional survivability and another emergency button, you can also slot Signet of Stone, but it shouldn't be needed. As the elite skill you have two options. My favorite is Strength of the Pack because it is a good source for Fury and can be precast in group content to empower yourself and your pet. You can also use this to ignore incoming CC in group content, since it also applies stability. The second option is Forest Fortification. This is more defensive compared to Strength of the Pack. It gives stability, resistance, resolution, and reduces incoming damage by 50% for 10 seconds. It also reduces its own cooldown for every hit you apply to enemies during those 10 seconds, making the cooldown rather short as long as you keep hitting stuff. Paired with Fervent Force, you can almost keep this up infinitely. Alright, before we move on to the gearing options, I wanted to discuss a few pet options. Make sure to set the damaging pet attacks to auto so you don't have to press them manually. I do forget that pretty often when I change pets, so this is also a try to get that into my own head. For damage purposes, you can use both the Tiger or the Lynx, which seem to be very comparable. I always put a White Tiger on the second slot to be able to provide Aegis to the subgroup on demand through its second skill. In open world, I like to use the Smoke Scale and the Jacaranda. Both are very durable and have nice utility built in. The Smoke Scale has a knockdown, a smoke field to combo with, and an evade, while the Jacaranda has a powerful Call Lightning ability, a long-lasting Immobilize, and a strong Selfie. Make sure to swap between pets before they die, otherwise they go on a long cooldown. Finally, if you want a ranged weapon option for times when you cannot be in melee, I recommend putting a longbow on the second weapon slot. This allows you to keep dealing damage at range, which is better than just standing there like a useless turd hitting air with your hammer. You should now have a basic idea on the skills that Untamed can use very effectively. Let's move on to gear and consumables. The gear for the DPS and open world build is the standard Radiant Fractal setup with full Berserker, Scholar Runes and Impact and Force Agents. We use this gear to maximize crit chance while flanking. If you only have exotic gear, you might want to put in a few pieces of Assassin's gear or use Precision Food to reach 50% in your hero panel. We'll cover the small gear adjustments required for the Alacrity variant later on. With a trait Vicious Quarry, Fury gives 40% crit chance and the last 10% and another 15% strike damage on top come from Hunter's Tactics. This, however, requires you to flank enemies. Flanking means to stand in at least 45 degrees from where the enemy is currently facing, so you do not need to stand behind or directly to the side of the enemy. You can often reach at least a partial uptime in open world on this by circling around enemies. On Untamed, there's no need to actually change to defensive gear, since all the survivability comes from unleashing your pet when you need defense. If you really need even more defense, you can further change a few traits or change utility skills. As consumables, we'll be using the standard power and ferocity food. If you can afford it, you can also go for the Ascended variant with either 10% reduced incoming damage or a small lifesteal. The utility item is the potent superior sharpening stone or any equivalent to it. For group content, you can also use a Writ of Masterful Strength if you have enough money on your hands for a small DPS boost. Okay, it's time for traits and specializations. As always, I won't go through all traits in detail and just cover the ones that define the playstyle. The 4 relevant specializations are Skirmishing, Marksmanship, Nature Magic and of course Untamed. We'll be starting with Skirmishing because it is used on all variants and is the main backbone of your damage. Skirmishing drastically increases your strike damage done through a lot of crit chance, 25% in total, another 15% damage modifier and 250 ferocity while you have Fury. It will also apply Swiftness and Fury to you when you swap weapons, which is why it can make sense to slot a second identical hammer. Unleashing does not count as a weapon swap, by the way, for whatever reason. For the Adept and Master traits you have different options. The highest consistent damage output is generated by Sharpened Edges and Hidden Barbs, which will make you and your pet apply bleeding on critical hits and increase the damage of that bleeding. For the open world and Alacrity variant, I recommend using Spotter instead of Hidden Barbs because that will contribute to boon uptime on Fury in your subgroup at a very small damage loss. In open world, this will probably increase your damage because you will gain Fury whenever you enter combat. The second specialization for group content is Marksmanship. Marksmanship amplifies your damage a lot with a 5% total damage amplifier and another 15% against disabled or defiant foes. The opening strike traits are rather negligible in group content because fights are longer and you don't reset. The adept trait Hunter's Gaze increases your personal might coverage, but if you feel like you need an emergency button or boon coverage, you can also use Stoneform or Clarion Bond respectively. In open world and on the Alacrity variant, we'll be using Nature Magic. This seems odd at first, but there's some real juice in there. Nature Magic will not only increase your damage for every boon you have, it will also copy every boon you get to your pet. With We Heal as one, you can then copy those boons back to yourself in open world, making boon coverage much easier. The power of this synergy increases further in group open world action, where you also receive external boons which are copied to your pet. Nature Magic also grants you regeneration when you are hit below 50% health, increased concentration, and with Protective Ward it will apply protection to you and your pet at frequent intervals. For the Master trait, you can choose freely between the top and bottom. If you want a little more sustaining group content, go for Windborne Nodes. This is strong in group scenarios where you have external applications of regen. If you want a reliable Condi cleanse on dodging, go for Evasive Purity. The Grandmaster trait depends on the content you do. In solo gameplay I use Protective Ward. For the Alacrity variant you need Nature's Vengeance. Finally, Untamed is the elite specialization. Untamed was a little odd to me at first because it all just didn't really fit together, but I very much enjoy it now that it has received several damage adjustments. The traits we'll be using generally strive for a maximization of damage, but still keep a rather simple to execute rotation. With the traits of choice, we increase the damage of the first Unleashed Pet skill, gain increased vitality, and siphon health with Unleashed Ambushes, and finally apply quickness or stability when disabling enemies, depending on who is unleashed. The most important traits are Vow of the Untamed, Ferocious Symbiosis, and Fervent Force. Vow of the Untamed either decreases incoming strike damage by 25% when your pet is unleashed and increases strike damage you deal by 25% when you are unleashed. This is the main reason why you want to be unleashed as much as possible if you don't need the defense. The DPS build uses Ferocious Symbiosis because that strongly simplifies the rotation at the cost of a good chunk of damage. If you want to maximize damage with a very spammy rotation, you can also use Fervent Force in group content. In that case, simply check out the Snowcrow's benchmark. In solo open world, however, we use Fervent Force. This resets the cooldown of all your skills by 4 seconds whenever you disable an enemy. With Hammer 3 and 5, Exploding Spores, and the Storm Spirit, you have a whole lot of CC skills. When you keep using those, that will constantly reset your skills in a loop so that they become available again shortly after you use them. The amount of CC you dish out that way is just incredible. Moving on to how to provide Alacrity. Providing Alacrity on Untamed is pretty simple and effective because you have access to the same CC capabilities, but you also provide boons. Might, Fury, Regen, and Alacrity, for example. In order to provide Alacrity, you need to use the Nature Magic trait Nature's Vengeance. This will increase the radius of effects created by spirits and will also make the active skills of spirits apply Alacrity in the effect radius. It will further reduce the health loss of spirits when their passive effects trigger, making them last longer. So all you need to do is to slap on a bunch of spirits and use the active skills on cooldown. Without Fervent Force, you need a little bit of additional boon duration over the 16% provided by Nature Magic. To be exact, a little over 30%. You can get to 30% by using a Diviner Hammer, for example. I usually slot the Elite Spirit as well because that will make it easier to cover Alacrity and it provides additional support at a negligible damage loss. The Elite Spirit also allows you to revive allies in cure conditions on its active skill, which is a nice gimmick on top. The overall rotation does not change much besides that, and this is a good moment to provide some rotation guidance. The rotation provided here is completely different from the benchmark rotation because it uses Ferocious Symbiosis instead of Fervent Force. As I said before, this simplifies the rotation drastically. The Fervent Force rotation does not look complex at first when you look at the page, but it's very spammy and involves lots of actions per minute. Plus getting the timings right there with all the swaps etc. is pretty difficult. The rotation I propose here is much more forgiving and will get you through all PvE group content very well. In the opener, I precast Strength of the Pack and we heal as one to put boons on the pet. Then use Hammer 4, 2, Frost Trap, Exploding Spores. Then unleash your pet, use all 3 pet skills and swap back as soon as possible. After swapping back, let the channel of the Unleashed Ambush finish. The rotation after the opener is based on a list of priorities combined with fixed skill combinations. The main priorities are Hammer 2 and 4 because they deal by far the highest damage per cast. Hammer 4 is your highest damage skill, so it's priority number 1. Then you also want to use Frost Trap and Exploding Spores on cooldown. The cooldown of Enveloping Haze lines up perfectly with Exploding Spores, so what I do is to always unleash the pet after I use Exploding Spores, to use all 3 pet skills, and then swap back as soon as possible. This might take a bit of practice to get used to, but I find it to be very satisfying and it creates a bit of a burst window. Hammer 3 and 5 are a small DPS gain over auto-attacking, but as I mentioned before, it's often worth it to keep them for CC phases. That's basically it. Try to finish your auto-attack chains and use the priority skills on cooldown. After Exploding Spores, unleash pet, use pet 1, 2, 3 and swap back and repeat. If Hammer 2 or 4 become available while your pet is unleashed, you can press them immediately after unleashing yourself to squeeze them in before the unleashed ambush starts. This rotation is very satisfying and straightforward to play, and it also yields good damage. Okay, that's it for today. I hope that this video was insightful for you and made you want to try out Untamed. Feel free to like and subscribe for the YouTube algorithm. See you next time and happy bunny thumping.